Imagine being chosen as a teenage girl, torn from your family, and locked away behind golden walls, never to see the outside world again. Your beauty, a gift and a curse, serves as both your passport and your prison. Your sole purpose, to compete. For the fleeting attention of one man, the Emperor of China? Welcome back to another eye-opening episode where today we delve into the heartbreaking, shadowy world of the Chinese imperial concubines and the hidden lives behind the grandeur of the Forbidden City. If you're fascinated by history's darker corners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon to stay updated with more gripping stories from the past. Deep within the Forbidden City's inner sanctums, far from the public's gaze, thousands of women lived, secluded, isolated. Lives. While most served as palace maids and attendants, a select few were chosen for a far more intimate, high-stakes role, concubines. With the sacred duty of bearing children for the emperor, these women were bound to the inner court, an isolated world tucked away in the palace's northern chambers. Their lives shaped by a rigid hierarchy, intense scrutiny, and ceaseless competition, were governed by a system that controlled their every move. At the top of this pyramid was the empress. Beneath her were imperial consorts, concubines, and then the vast array of female servants and palace workers. This strict structure was more than ceremonial. It dictated every aspect of their lives. The practice of selecting concubines dates back to the Jin dynasty, but by the Ming and Qing dynasties, it had evolved into a merciless, elaborate system. During the Ming dynasty, all unmarried women, unless married or unfit, were legally required to undergo the imperial selection process. No family, no matter how humble, was exempt. Under the Qing dynasty, however, the selection process narrowed further, mainly focusing on Manchu and Mongol families within the eight-banner system, Han. Chinese girls were largely excluded to maintain control and loyalty. The selection process was grueling, far from romantic. Families brought their daughters to the Shenwu gate of the Forbidden City, where they underwent intense scrutiny. Their body hair, skin condition, and even their sleep habits were examined. Yes, even their sleeping habits. Candidates had to share a bed with the emperor's mother to assess how they slept, whether they snored, moved too much, or had an unpleasant odor in the night. A single wrong move could ruin their chances. Those who made it through the first round were trained in how to walk, speak, sit, bow, and behave. They learned calligraphy, chess, dance, and poetry. But this grooming wasn't for success only. For survival, the competition was brutal, and only a few dozen girls made it through the final stages. Out of them, only 3 were chosen to become the emperor's top concubines. The rest, many of whom never met the emperor, would live there. Lives in the palace, never experiencing the life they were chosen for, but the competition didn't end there. It became even more perilous. Jealousy and political maneuvering were constant threats. Those concubines who caught the emperor's eye became the targets of envy and resentment. Their every move was monitored not just by rivals but by the ever-watchful eunuchs who enforced the emperor's will. Before a concubine could visit the emperor's bedchamber, she had to bathe, be inspected by a physician, wait for a formal summons. If chosen, her name was recorded in vermilion ink by a scribe, an official record of the emperor's nightly activities. These acts, far from being personal, were matters of national importance. The emperor might have hundreds, or even thousands, of concubines, yet many of them spent their lives confined to their chambers, sewing, applying makeup, and waiting for a summons that might never come. This system was built on Confucian ideals, where managing a household with many wives was seen as a sign of manhood. For the emperor, having many women wasn't just for pleasure, it was a political necessity. Securing an heir was his highest duty. While polygamy was common among the wealthy and noble classes, among these many wives, one woman stood above all, the principal wife. She was expected to maintain harmony, suppress jealousy, and guide the other women with dignity. In this world, love, in the romantic sense, had no place. The emperor could not favor one woman too much. Emotions had no place in the empire's grand machinery. Each new wife was assigned a rank, a position that determined her status in the palace. This hierarchy influenced everything from her clothing to her housing and even how she bowed in court. Beneath all of this structure and beauty lay a grim truth. These women were prisoners. Most of them would never leave the Forbidden City, many dying forgotten by history. The glittering palace, admired by outsiders, was nothing more than a gilded cage to them. And then, the inevitable question: what happened after the emperor died? This is where the story of concubinage takes a darker, more tragic turn. Concubines were not just companions. They were considered the emperor's property, both in life and often in death. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of women, often close in age and status, buried beside a single man, suggesting that some concubines were sacrificed to accompany their emperor into the afterlife. Different dynasties had varying customs for the fate of deceased emperors' concubines. Generally, if the concubine's son ascended to the throne, she remained in the palace, enjoying greater influence. If she had no children, her future was far bleaker. High-ranking consorts from noble families sometimes returned to their homes to live in peace, but most concubines, especially those from humble origins, are consigned to a life of isolation, forgotten by history. Some were sent to nunneries, abandoning their past lives, while others were tasked with guarding the emperor's tomb, living near the burial site, forever mourning in silence. In some older dynasties, concubines who had failed to bear children were executed after the emperor's death and buried with him as spiritual offerings. One remarkable exception to this bleak fate was Wu Zixin, a concubine of Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty. After his death, she was sent to a Buddhist nunnery. But fate had other plans. She later formed a relationship with Taizong's son, Li Zi, who became emperor and made her his queen. Wu Zixin ultimately rose to become the only female emperor in Chinese history, defying every expectation placed upon her gender and role. But Wu Zixin was the rare anomaly. For most concubines, life after the emperor's death was grim. During the Han Dynasty, concubines were sometimes allowed to live with their sons in distant territories. But those without children were left behind, tending to the imperial tomb. Over time, the system evolved, and some concubines, especially those who had borne children, were treated with respect and allowed to live in comfort. Others, however, were exiled or forced to live in silence. The most unusual case was that of consort Wengu, concubine to China's last emperor Puyi. After his expulsion from the Forbidden City, she chose to divorce him, a remarkable act for a concubine. Puyi, though dethroned, granted her commoner status. Wengu went on to become a schoolteacher, quietly living the rest of her life in Beijing. Her story marked the symbolic end of a centuries-old system, though hers was just one voice. It resonated with the silent voices of thousands of concubines, most of whom never had the chance to speak.